Closed NYC subway tunnels. Close to half a year ago, someone on X posted a story about mole people. I was a lurker back then and did not contribute or post, mainly out of concern for my identity. Yes, even in an anon board, people find ways to identify people. The thread gained some notoriety and 404'd at somewhere close to 250 get. It was archived on 4chanarchive.org for quite some time, before it eventually 404'd as well. I'll do some digging. I may have the thread saved somewhere on this computer. If I find it, I will post the thread in its entirety at the end of mine. Several years ago, I worked for the NYC MTA. Working for the custodial department is just as you would imagine it to be. A shitty job, but allowed for much more access to various places that normal civilians would not see. All under the guise of cleaning after NYC. I was granted access to some of the deepest and darkest parts of the city. And believe me, cleaning up after New Yorkers is not an easy task. I have not worked for the city department in ages, so I feel it's now somewhat safe to share my personal accounts and experiences. And let's not kid ourselves, I did not choose this profession. It was something I simply picked up. My past did not allow for such luxuries as working in an office or business environment. When I was younger, I hung out with the wrong crowds, did some bad things, which eventually led me to where I was back then, a janitor of sorts. Anytime from roughly 8 a.m. to about 3 a.m. the following morning, there were various cleaning staff traveling the subway systems, cleaning up after visitors and New Yorkers. From time to time, there would be requests for certain cleaning tasks at a specific station, but for the most part, a cleaner is designated to his or her station. I was mainly stationed by downtown Manhattan, which in my opinion was probably the dirtiest of all the stations. It's not mostly the adults that would leave a mess, but rather the kids. So either in the mornings when school started, or when school ended, the kids from nearby high schools and elementary schools would leave gum, spit, and whatever else behind, making a big mess. You'd think my main complaint was the hobos, or the drunkards, who pissed or defecated on the floors, but those aren't regular occurrences. For the most part, people acted civil. During the time between school hours, very little was asked of me. This allowed me to roam the tunnels, or visit fellow workers in other stations. On a few occasions, we'd talk about the various encounters we had with hobos, catching a few, sneaking into the subway stations, and sometimes onto the tracks, or the odd places they managed to find shelter, deep within the subway tunnels. The term we used was mole people. I'm not really sure who coined the term, but between 1994 and 1997, some lady by the name of Jennifer Toff wrote a book called The Mole People, and even before that, books and films depicted the notion of people living underground, either due to loss of jobs, homes, etc. In 96 to 97, there was a documentary that came out called Dark Days. It was mostly about homeless people being interviewed underground. As sanitation workers, we rarely spoke with the homeless. It was sort of an internal policy because eventually they would start asking for things, or making bizarre requests like staying the night in a particular area. They would then leave a mess and we'd have to clean it up. Let's just say that the cleaning crew and the homeless were mostly at ends with each other. On a few occasions, we were assigned to abandoned stations to do cleanup. Considering the size of Manhattan and its history, there were estimated to be up to hundreds of various tracks that were either abandoned due to the lack of funding or rerouted for more optimal routes. Believe it or not, Grand Central Station does in fact house a vast tunnel that once served as an escape route for various dignitaries. I've never been granted clearance to access it. However, I have cleaned up and worked with others in smaller abandoned tunnels and stations. First encounter. Back in 1995, I was asked to join 3 fellow cleaning crews to clean up a station that was sandwiched between the 1 and the A train. You'd never see it from the trains, but it was definitely there, and what was surprising about the entire ordeal was that it was pretty well kept. Because of its location, the crew and I could not access the station via train. We walked the tracks only after a coordinated meeting was held and conductors were informed not to take that specific track. As we got closer to the station, we all noticed it was kept in somewhat pristine condition, with the exception of dust and various molds that had sprouted from the wall. One worker had brought along a boombox so that we would be able to listen to music while we worked, and surprisingly, the electric sockets were still running. We mopped, scrubbed, and dusted all that we could for the next 2 hours, when suddenly, one of the workers, female, screamed in fear. Everyone rushed over to see what was happening. The look of fear on her face was something I had never seen or experienced before. She kept pointing into a dark, closed-off section of the station. She said, "I heard someone shout, 'Go away.'" The other 2 workers laughed it off as if it were a joke, but we all stood there in silence when a loud thud echoed from the darkness. We were all mortified when again, someone from the darkness shouted, "Go away." Michael, who was the person with the most seniority, immediately got on the walkie-talkie and requested assistance. We all just stood there, paralyzed in fear. Not many people know this, but the MTA has its own security team. They are there to serve and protect the people working in the MTA, but for the most part, they are equivalent to RAC, rent-a-cops. For the next 30 minutes, everyone in the station stood in silence, trying to comprehend how on earth someone could end up in an abandoned station. When the RAC arrived, he had his pistol drawn and entered the dark, chained-off section of the station. It seemed like minutes went by until he re-emerged with 2 people in handcuffs. The characteristics of these 2 people were almost impossible to describe. They were both dressed in what seemed like 60s attire. One of them a male, who had suspenders and what appeared to be once a pinstripe trouser. His hair so long that it masked his jawline where his beard was. The other, a woman who was wearing a dress so tattered that it was beyond recognition. They were both young, probably in their teens. The RAC said that he found these 2 hiding in the dark, staring at the exit as if they were expecting to attack when he spotted them. Needless to say, we left the station. Some internal investigation was put into excavating the area. Whatever was discovered was never disclosed to us. It was also around the same time that my 3 fellow co-workers were reassigned to LIRR, Long Island Railroad, so I hardly saw them again. There was a site a while back that actually documented a few of the hidden or forgotten underground tunnels of NYC subways, but I can't seem to find it right now. I also can't seem to dig up the old Mole People thread that was archived a while back. If I find it, I will post it. Keep in mind, NYC has a rather interesting history when it comes to subway tracks. New ones are built and forgotten and sometimes rerouted for optimization, so it's not implausible that there are stations that are left unattended and or mismanaged. I've seen a few in my days, but there are certainly a lot more that I haven't seen. Second encounter. Not long after the incident, while all the people from the original cleaning crew were transferred to other stations, I continued working in Cortlandt Street Station. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's how the city was managed. No one brought up what had happened, and neither did I, at least not with anyone who wasn't there. I did manage to meet up with Michael once or twice when I was crossing into Long Island from the city. We would have lunch and talk about what happened. Michael knew more than I did. Apparently, his superiors put a hush-hush on the incident. No one was to talk about it with anyone. The 2 people that were found had no identification, and there were no records of these people. Supposedly, they were sent to some asylum somewhere. Something about being delusional and suffering from malnutrition and mental issues. I was told that it was best not to talk about it. Since dropping the subject, I really stopped talking to Michael. We didn't really have much in common, and there wasn't really anything else to talk about. Working in Cortlandt Street Station had its perks. Mainly, I had the freedom to really roam around and get the lay of the land. I managed to figure out from the New York City Library that there were pictures and some forms of blueprints available for some of the older tracks. Having a loose schedule of which trains went where, I found myself the opportunity to do some tunnel exploring. Late one evening, I stepped onto the redacted station tracks and started walking. By all accounts, at least according to an old subway map, there should be an abandoned station that led to a longer, much narrower passageway that once served as a means to haul munitions and other various materials for the government. Armed with a flashlight, some paracord, a film camera, and a map, I managed to locate this corridor. I narrowly missed becoming another janitor's problem when one train passed me almost head on. I figured it was only a matter of minutes before the conductor notified the station manager, so I figured the only way I'd be able to keep my shitty job was to haul ass and make a run for the passageway. Being a planner has its advantages. For one thing, I plotted out all the escape routes needed to exit the target site without being noticed, so I continued on my adventure and made my way through the passageway. One thing really bothered me, and it ate away at my mind as I ventured forth. The passageway was only going down, deeper and deeper. My biggest concern was whether or not I'd be able to make my way back up and out if I continued. The flashlight worked wonders, but it was by no means a mag light, and as I went deeper into the tunnel, the darker spots of the passageway increased. Several meters into the passageway, I started to hear sounds. For a moment, I stood there in silence, trying to figure out what it was. I tried desperately to convince myself that the noises were rats chit-chatting amongst themselves. If ever I was more vulnerable in believing in a deity, it was then. What's strange is that after you go down a certain amount of depth, the noises stopped. At one point, I was quite mystified that even the trains could not be heard. The further down I went, the hotter it got. Having brought a camera, I wanted to document what I had experienced and seen, but without a decent flash, most of the images came out blurry at best. It did, however, manage to scare away the half-dollar-sized roaches that were just about everywhere. Every time I flashed the camera, I would hear loud hissing and see the roaches scurry in all sorts of directions. My boots were pretty much covered in sludge and roach corpses, but it became really hot, to the point where I had considered taking off my shirt, but the thought of roaches scurrying all over my body quickly discouraged me. Further and further I went, until I started to hear what sounded like pots and pans clinking one another. It literally stopped me dead in my tracks as I tried to figure out what it was, but each subsequent step I took, the clinking would grow louder and louder. Suddenly, I had realized I somehow managed to snag a line onto my backpack, and it was triggering the noise. I stopped to examine it, when out of nowhere, I see a shadowy figure almost glide right past me. The only way I could describe it was from some Japanese horror movie, where the ghost passes behind the main character, unbeknownst to him. It literally scared me to my core. That's when I hauled ass back to where I had entered from. I eventually made my way onto some tracks, but they were definitely not from Street Station. I had somehow ended up by Fulton Street Station, which was at the very least several blocks away from my entry point. When I got home, I tried to calm myself and tried to recollect what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more I came to believe that I might have set off some primitive alarm system. Set up by whom, I couldn't be sure, but the MTA definitely would not use pots and pans to string an alarm of sorts. I've told no one of the story, only to a very few close friends and family. Background story. I'm in a university program where we basically study the architecture of local villages. I'm in the Southeast Asia area. Set up a big platoon tent in a field beside a small factory. We break off into groups that study different parts of the village. Nothing special with my group. Interview some locals and measure houses. One group says their area includes a river that is off limits. Let's call them the river group. Someone died in a flash flood some previous years near the river, apparently. That night, all the groups are cross-checking with each other's data. One girl, not from the river group, asks a girl from the river group, was the victim who died in the flash flood a woman? Yes. Was she wearing a hijab? Yes. Was she a nurse? Fucking yes. Apparently, the girl saw the victim enter the tent and sit among us and disappear. I got one or two more stories from this trip if anyone is interested. One of them involved the factory. Fuck this. It's 4 a.m. and I can't sleep. I'm the poster that studied the village. Still studying the same village. Staying in the big platoon tent. It's a protocol to have night watch duty with 2 people in our university program. Wake the others up in case of wild animals, thieves, or spooks. Pretty common in Southeast Asia area, especially rural areas. Guy, let's call him F, and girl, P, on watch. F is watching the entrance beside the factory. We basically dump our trash and food leftovers and put them in a plastic bag near the factory wall. F, looking around, notices something rummaging through our trash. Probably just a cat. He was right. Well, not quite. Notice that the cat is abnormally large. It has black fur, F focuses on the cat, whispers to F, "Do you see it?" "Yes." F shines a flashlight to the cat. That's not a cat. It was a humanoid, sitting cross-legged, but furry, and with the head of a cat too. What the fuck? Catman looks up to F, gone in a blink. Ghosts are a part of Southeast Asia culture, but here in my country, that is something unheard of. We took it up to the village elder and asked him about it. It was basically an ancestor spirit, called it Meong. Basically, my language's version of meow. Be me. Be a janitor at my local mall by day. Be necromancer by night. Studied necromancy in secret for years. Basically, my job consists of driving around a Zamboni and mopping restaurants at the mall. At home, I read dark magic books in PDF and post on X and practice the dark arts. One day, found a dead fetus in one of the toilets at the mall. Blood everywhere. Seems that someone did not want to have a baby or something. Fetus is maybe 4 to 5 months old. Clean the room. Place the lifeless fetus inside a black plastic bag. Go home. Practice some spells on it. Nothing. Decide to implant a lost soul into it. Somehow, I created an imp. Ugly looking, but does not attack me. The imp looks hungry. Lock it into the basement. Imp feeds on rats and mice for the first night. Hide the imp inside a metal toolbox. Get a side gig as an exterminator. Co-worker mentions rats in her attic. Go to her house and leave the toolbox with the imp overnight. Her rat problem got resolved. Place my imp back into the toolbox. Left the toolbox in the back of my truck. Stopped to refuel at a gas station. Get inside, wait in line to pay for gas. When I came back, realized someone stole my toolbox. My face when someone out there is my rat-eating imp. Nope on a boat. Here's my story about what happened to me and a few of our people while sleeping aboard the USS Lexington. I was 15, and it was time for our Boy Scout troop's annual trip to the USS Lexington. Every year, my troop would take part in the Live Abroad program. You basically spend all day and all night on the ship, sleep in the old enlisted quarters, and have fun. Every year, we would hear the same stupid, free spoopy 7Me ghost stories from the same dude. Then it was lights out. But a few in the group, about 8 to 10 of the older youth, would stay awake all night for firewatch. Back then, we would have to take all the tours once an hour throughout the night. All of the main hall lights were out, so it was pretty creepy. I was not selected for firewatch the previous year. This was my third cruise, so I was pretty stoked. This year it was myself and 4 guys from my troop, along with about 6, 4 guys, 1 girl, from a venturing crew that was there. We dick around for about half of every hour, and then go through the tours. After a few hours, I head out with 3 of the venturers. Let's call them Dude's GF, and Pimpleface. We head up from our galley type area into the hangar bay. Pick related in OP, in before OP canned art. Once we're in the hangar bay, we started towards the bow of the ship, the front. The only thing with lights on in the entire hangar bay was the snack bar. Sleeping quarters were adjacent to the fantail, rear lower deck of the ship. We are just shooting the shit, saying no way were we going to run through the engine room. Walking side by side, as an OP pick, I was between Dude and the vinyl wall that deprecated everyone from the restoration area. As we walk, we hear a little girl giggle. What the fuck? We all look at each other and immediately look around. We don't see anything or anyone. Maybe it's the guy from the ghost stories fucking with us, is what we come up with. Whatever. We were all 15 to 17, and there was a chick there, so we ballsed up and kept going. We make it another 20 yards before we hear it again, but distinctly louder and obviously from behind this time. We all turn around, and there he was, pick related. We all stood still for what seemed an eternity, but what must have been only a couple of seconds. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was like wispy black, with defined arms, legs, torso, and head. The eyes and the mouth were hollow, like you could plainly see the light from the snack bar behind it. It was like he was staring at us with a grin in his void of a mouth. I don't know why, but even with the girlish giggle, I've always felt that it was masculine. Then in the blink of an eye, it moved behind the corner. I don't mean that it ran. It just went without moving its legs, and this was at least 15 feet. I looked at Dude, and he looked at me. We both immediately dashed after it. We sprinted the 20 yards and came around the corner. Nothing was there, except for the passage to the engine room. There was nowhere else for anyone to have gone, but to the crew quarters, and we would have seen that. Pimpleface and GF caught up to us. GF asked what it was. We had no freaking clue. Dude and I had this overwhelming sense of dread and a need to follow it. Pimpleface was pussing out, and GF was not going to stay behind, so we headed back to our area in the crew quarters. It was a quiet walk. Only 10 minutes had passed since we left our area, so everybody was like, that was fast. Then they saw that we were visibly shaken. GF said, I ain't going back out there, and then sat down with Dude. Pimpleface just went and distracted himself with a movie. The others started asking us questions and said we made the whole thing up, but were now all too freaked to go out, except one of the others wanted to go see if it was true. I said I'd go with him. I still had this urge, this need to see it closer. Dude wanted to go, but GF had his balls in her purse and would not let him leave her, so New Guy and I head out. As we walk, I keep trying to reason in my head what I had just seen. Could it have been a prank? But we would have heard footsteps on the middle deck. And how the hell did it move without moving its legs? Dear God, I could almost see through its body like it was made of smoke. Even with those thoughts going through my head, I still headed up with New Guy. I pointed to him where it was, and that it had gone towards the engine room. We stood around for a second, then kept heading towards the bow of the ship. We wanted to walk through the anchor area and pre-flight briefing rooms as we had originally did. It takes a solid 5+ minutes to get from Hangar D, rear of the ship, to Hangar A, but we did not even make it to Hangar C. At the end of the vinyl, just as we got to the corner, right where the only source of light was our one flashlight, we heard the distant giggle. This time it was coming from behind. This time it was from the complete darkness ahead, right where we wanted to go. This time, something in me flipped on. This time was different. Every fiber in my being screamed to get the fuck out of there. There was no way I was following this thing into the complete darkness. Needless to say, New Guy was ready to head back too. The whole way back, it felt as if someone was just a few steps behind us. Something told me to not look back, to just keep going. After the seemingly longest walk ever, we get back into our main area. So, did y'all see it then? Asked Dude. Heard the giggle, turned around, I replied. No one wanted to talk about it again. We did not do another Firewatch walkthrough for the rest of the night. No one said it, but every once in a while, someone looked over their shoulder, or down one of the nearby halls, as if they had seen something move. One of my friends, who had turned 18 a couple years before, who came as an assistant scoutmaster, was up an hour before the rest of the others who weren't on Firewatch. He took a dump and brushed his teeth. Then while walking towards our group, he looked down the hall and just stood there for a while. He looked at me and motioned for me to come over. Is anyone from the Cub Scout pack down there? He asked me. Nope, I replied. They are all in the quarters on the other side of the head, bathroom. He looked at me, then back at the hall. Then why did I just see someone walk into the room down there as I passed by? I looked at him, smiled, and said, You don't even want to know. That morning everything went normal, except we went and informed the director of the Live Abroad program, same guy that tells us spoopy stories, about the previous night. He just said, I've heard all the stories, but that's a new one. If I get any more reports, I will believe. Screw you too, dude. A year goes by, and Troop is back out there. I had told a few of the guys about what happened, and they wanted to see if it would happen again. We spend all ducking around the ship, then it's nighttime. But something has changed with Firewatch. This time, the rules have changed. Now we have to be accompanied by one of the Lexington volunteers. We get stuck with one of the edgy ones, but she's pretty cool. She decides to take us on an off-limits tour in the middle of the night. You basically go through all of the off-limit areas that are still easily accessible, but weird as hell. Everything goes pretty smoothly, but then she brings us to this tiny 10x10 room that has 2 bulkheads. The floor is covered in old tile that has rust in every freaking joint. In the middle of the room was a cast iron medical table, both ends of the table raised and lowered by 45 degrees. She explained to us that we were standing in the room that had the most deaths of the entire ship. It was the freaking amputation room. Seamen were brought in there for quick amputation to alleviate the workload in the tiny sick bay. One would be brought in, given morphine, and had a tourniquet applied. Then they just saw the limb off. The worst part was that the floor would become soaked in an inch or two of blood, which would then have to be mopped out. The blood had soaked into the cracks of the tile, the same exact tile we were standing on. The blood that had soaked in below the tile is the reason that was the only room that had rust. Creepypasta.pnv. As soon as we stepped out of that room, I felt the same presence as the year before. I kept seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. Felt like something was walking beside me, but nothing else major happened. She told us some of the stories framed on Tasteful to tell the general Liverbrook group. One such story claims that there are a minimum of 2 resident demons on the ship. The rest of the trip was normal, nothing interesting. That was the last year that my troop went to the Blue Ghost, one of the Lexington's nicknames, while I was still in Scouts. Be May, 16. Live with my sister, her partner, and their 4 kids. Babysitting tonight. They're going on a date. 10 p.m. Kids are in bed. I'm in my room, playing Skyrim. Sister pops in to let me know they're heading out. From my room, I hear the front door slide open, then shut. Hear my sister's heeled boots cross the deck. Hear the car door open, then slam shut. Moments later, hear the front door, then her partner's heavy boots, then the car door. Hear the car start up and zoom down the street. Briefly consider locking the door, but decide I'm not going to sleep till 3 a.m. anyway, so there is no point. Nobody is breaking in when the house is obviously occupied. 10 minutes later, hear heavy footsteps on the deck, then the sliding door. It must be my sister's partner. Heavy footsteps walk around the living room a few times. Moves to the kitchen. I hear every cabinet door and kitchen drawer open and shut. He must be looking for something. After a few minutes, he leaves. Door slides open, door slides shut. Heavy footsteps cross the deck. Decide to finally lock the door. All is well. Until I realize something. I never heard a car. Who the fuck was in my house? Message sister. Ask why they came back. We didn't. Tell her I heard someone in the house. It wasn't us. Who the fuck was in my house? This happened about 10 years ago in a family trip and scared the living shit out of me. I still don't know exactly what it was. It was probably just my brain fucking with me or something. Drive in one car with friends and family cause it's cheaper and we all fit in my dad's minivan. We approach a level crossing. Lights are white, which in Europe means cool to go. Dad even looks both ways. Nothing suspicious. Suddenly, loud as fuck train horns as we are on the tracks. This is it. Life flashes before eyes. Close eyes as I brace for impact. Wait a few seconds before opening eyes. Wow, it's fucking nothing. No trains around. Nobody else seemed to notice. Feel dumb as shit. There were at least 7 of us, and nobody knew what I was talking about.